Hi there, thank you so much for joining me again on this channel. Can I yet again apologise for the incredibly poor lighting? It looks like I'm a hostage or something in here. But we do have some solutions, hopefully, on the way. Another thing I just want to say is I'm very, very grateful for all the support and the likes from the previous video. I didn't think it was my best by any stretch of the imagination, but I'm so pleased that you enjoyed what I had to say in a very rambling fashion about Jurassic Park. A key thing about this channel is to think about teaching and learning. I wanted to investigate and highlight some of the things that are happening in the world of education, be it resources, be it current news trends, whatever it may be. And one of the things I wanted to look at was a book. And I want to emphasize it doesn't matter if you're a teacher, a lecturer, or a student or a pupil. Okay, I want this to be as accessible as it can be for everyone. So maybe you look at this and you're a student and you go to your college, say to your lecturer, look, have you actually seen this book or this resource? Really interesting. Or maybe you're doing your teacher training and you think, oh, actually, this is something I hadn't thought about before. I'm not going to lie, I'm really bad at reading educational journals or bits of literature. One of the reasons is because I think sometimes they're a little bit dry, and this was something that I got really excited about because I just found it such a great read. It's something called Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell. He's an intellectual inventor. He is a statistician, he's a sociologist, a cultural commentator. And in this book, he takes the idea of outliers. An outlier is somebody who goes against the norm, someone who is perhaps against the mainstream of society. And though it's not strictly about education, I was really profoundly challenged by some of his outcomes and findings. And I thought all I wanted to do was just to highlight a few of them with you. So what we'll do is, he first of all starts talking about, in the opening chapter, don't worry, I'm not going to go through all the chapters, about Canadian hockey. Canadians love their hockey as much as they love maple syrup, I'm guessing. And one of the things about Canadian hockey is very much seen as a meritocracy. The idea is that all school kids have the opportunity to play ice hockey, and then they are selected and they have more intensive sessions and eventually feed up into the national squad. Not a particularly strange idea, something not unusual when it comes to selecting and highlighting sporting ability. But what Gladwell highlights is that how there's some very interesting quirk. The Canadian cut-off point for junior hockey is the 1st of January. What he says, look, if you think about it, that means someone who is born on the 2nd of January could conceivably be playing somebody who was born on, say, the 31st of December. And what happens is that you have these sort of smaller kids who perhaps aren't as physically big as the others, okay, might not, could even potentially be a little bit more skillful, but of course they're squeezed out by their literally bigger brothers and sisters. And in the book he shows really quite starkly how being born early on in the year, okay, gives you a huge advantage than being born later on in the year in terms of success in being picked up by the Canadian ice hockey authorities. And he then concludes the chapter by saying, well, isn't that interesting how it works in education? Now, Malcolm Gladwell resides in the United States, and he says, wouldn't it be interesting if when you structured schools, okay, particularly at high schools or secondary schools, actually maybe you could do it based on the month of birth. So maybe do it in September, October, November for one stream, December, January, February for another, so forth and so on. And because the marked differences in maturity are so apparent, that might be a way of making sure to narrow that education gap. And I thought that was really interesting. There's often a lot of discussion about how we set or stream or arrange students. And I love the way he takes something such as Canadian hockey, makes connection to education. It's something he's really good at, and a really great mind in terms of thinking differently. Another thing he highlights as well is that classic 10,000 hours rule. And here are the Beatles. Please excuse me. In Hamburg. At that time, the lineup was made up of John Lennon, Paul McCartney, George Harrison, Pete Best, who was the drummer, and on the far right, Stuart Sutcliffe, who very sadly passed away in the late excuse me, he passed away due to a brain hemorrhage. A very gifted artist as well, but his girlfriend at the time was responsible for the Beatles having their distinctive mop-top haircut. When they went to Hamburg, they were working 8-hour shifts, often 7 days a week, practicing, 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 practicing. And that's how they became so taut and so tight as a unit when it came to performing. And Malcolm Gladwell says it is astonishing how they had that opportunity, and that's that word, opportunity, okay, to rehearse, and they became one of the, if not the, arguably most influential band in the world. But those foundations were laid in those clubs of Hamburg in Germany, slaving away, slaving away. Now, let's take this a little bit further, or Malcolm takes it a little bit further forwards. Look at someone like Bill Gates, hugely successful, and particularly not just with Microsoft, but also in terms of his philanthropy with the Bill Gates Foundation. Before he got to university, he was actually able to have over 10,000 hours of computer programming, which seems completely astonishing for someone who was born in 1955, because at that time, when he was old enough, access to computers was very, very limited. But he went to a high school called Lakeside that actually had a computer. It was a relatively wealthy background he came from, and the parents were able to put together a fund. Okay, we might have a fund for for a mini bus or a new classroom, whatever it might be, whatever educational establishment you're at, and they were able to have a computer. That meant he had access to a computer, which in 1968 was pretty rare. If not extraordinary. He then also had opportunities as well when he was at the University of Washington, and he was within walking distance, okay, to have free computer time with some programmers in a nearby institution. So the point that's being made by Gladwell, and he also had some other opportunities as well, Bill Gates, is that yes, he was hardworking and is hardworking, but he had an opportunity of 10,000 hours, which not everybody has. I think that's quite fascinating, because the point is that yes, you need to have a work ethic, but also you need to make sure that you have able to access or have different outlets to make the best of your hard work. So basically, rather than gardening over the summer or having a paper round, Bill Gates was programming. And let's have a little look here. Another thing that Malcolm Gladwell talks about, and we touched on it a little bit with the 10,000 hours rule, was opportunities. And what he does, he takes the 75 richest people that have ever lived in the history of the world, okay, all the way back from Egyptian times, and he picks up on one remarkable fact, that of the 75 people who've lived the richest, most opulent lifestyle in history, and we're talking all the way back to the Egyptians, okay, 14 of them are Americans who were born in the 1830s. 14. So that comes out at roughly 20%. Because what happened in the 1830s, and he illuminates this brilliantly, is that Wall Street was beginning to form by the time these guys were old enough to get into business. The railroads were coming together. There was mass industrialization. They'd obviously also had these extraordinary opportunities. And he says sometimes it's luck. Sometimes it just is. Because these guys were born, okay, at the right time, at a really fertile time for industry, they were able to make their money. And as someone who loves teaching, who loves being in education, I found that quite shocking, because I've always had this idea that the outlier, that individual who goes against the grain, like Shackleton fighting the elements, or Marie Curie, and doing her amazing chemistry and scientific research. I always thought that sometimes it was just down to that stubbornness of that individual, and commitment is important. Gladwell makes that clear. But sometimes it's just where you are born, what you have the opportunities to do. And I'm not quite sure what to do with that information, really. And it's something I'm still thinking about and reflecting upon, because I think many of us who are in education want to make a difference. But it really is quite a thought-provoking chapter and part of his book. And the other thing that he talks about quite brilliantly is agriculture, and how agriculture, I know it seems like a weird thing, but bear with me. And Malcolm Gladwell is a master storyteller, and actually there's a lesson in there for me that actually I think some of the best teachers are the best storytellers. He says agriculture has a profound effect on our education system of young people. So, by the way, he tells it far more eloquently than I could. Think about how in the West, broadly speaking, the reason why there are long summer holidays in schools in Europe and of course in the United States of America is down to crops and getting in the harvest, because the young people, the kids, were needed to get the harvest in. I think fair enough. Okay, it is quite bizarre though that we still have this system. However, in the Far East, China, Singapore, Japan, the educational year is very, very different. Youngsters spend a lot more time in school, and that's partly a cultural thing, down to the type of crop that was grown, which was rice. Rice requires in its paddy field a very specific, very detailed kind of mindset. It requires very close attention to detail. So, for example, you dig your clay pit, you then have the mud put on top, and then you sow and plant the rice. And it's that very close attention to detail, that constant industry that Gladwell argues translates into a culture where education is perhaps valued more. I'll give you an example. He even talks about numbers and mathematics and says, well, why then do we associate Eastern education with being so much more literate with numbers? He says part of that is down to language as well. So if you look in English, I was thinking about this morning, trying to think about what's the longest way of saying a number in the English language. Think about, I think it was, 77. It takes a really long time to say it. And think as well about the logic of when you go after 10. So you have 11, 12, then you skip to 13, 14 and 15. It's very, very cumbersome. What you have in Eastern languages is that saying numbers is a lot quicker, but also a lot more logical. So 11 is 10-1, 12 is 10-2, so forth and so on. And I think that was very interesting about how looking at those cultural differences as well, very sensitively written and backed up with some good research. Everything is in the glossary, sorry, the index in the back, referenced very clearly. So that really got me thinking as well. And what he does is he references something in the United States called the KIPS program, Knowledge is Power program for schools. And what they do is that they follow a very, very rigid form of education, very different to the Western style. Mainly for kids from very poor backgrounds. They're selected by lottery, and what they do is that they follow a system of going into school on Saturdays. They have going to school over the summer holidays as well. The idea is that if you're continuously being able to practice your skills, think about that 10,000 hour rule as well. If you're able to refresh your memory, okay, and commit that knowledge, then that will make you have a growth mindset and perhaps a more stronger attitude towards your learning. Please excuse me. So that's all I wanted to leave you with. And I'm not going to lie, some of the things that Malcolm Gladwell says are profound, but I'm not quite sure where to take them next and how that's going to influence my practice. So that's all I'm going to say. It's published by Penguin. It's $9.99, available from all good bookshops and probably some dodgy ones as well. In the meantime, please amongst yourselves comment, like and share, but most importantly, please enjoy your learning.